Chapter 377, Natural Divine Iron. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Who dares intrude upon the sword stealer? On the boundless sacred mountain, a cold voice sounded among the clouds. After a long cry, two young warriors in flashy black martial robes leapt off from the sacred mountain. They stood on the cliff like two sacred monkeys. Their body movement was subtle and agile. A moment later, they passed through the cliff, the stone forest, and the gully, and landed on a place about 100 feet away from Zhang Yuochen. They were a man and a woman. The man was handsome and tall, giving off a heroic sense of arrogance. The younger woman looked like she was in her teens. She had a round face and braided a ponytail. Although she was not a startling beauty, she was quite cute. The so-called sword stealer was the blue stone tablet of more than 57 meters tall. It stood by Zhang Yuochen's side, and Sword Sanctum was engraved on it. The rule of Sword Sanctum, death to all who trespasses. Zhang Yuochen certainly knew this rule. So, he did not cross the boundary of Sword Stealer, but he stood behind the Sword Stealer. He said with dignity, "I am a student of the School of the Martial Market, Zhang Yuochen. I'm here to visit Master Lu." Both Zhang Yuochen and Lu Yuanzai's identity were secrets. Before seeing Lu Yuanzai, Zhang Yuochen would never expose his real identity. The young girl was called Lu Xuan. Her eyes kept darting around. She spared a glance at Zhang Yuochen's feet, seeing that Zhang Yuochen did not cross the sword stealer. She said, "Let alone you are a student of the School of the Martial Market. Even if you are a Saint of Saint Academy, you are not qualified to meet the ancestor. I suggest you leave here immediately. Otherwise, don't blame me for being unkind to you." Zhang Yuochen seemed to have been expecting her response. He took his time and said, "Miss, you haven't reported this to Master Lu. How do you know that he won't meet me?" Lu Xuan smiled. "There is no need to report it. With enormous power and influence, our ancestor won't even meet a saint, let alone you." Lu Fanshan carefully looked at Zhang Yuochen and said, "We aren't expelling you by force because you are a student of the School of the Martial Market. Brother, if you don't leave, don't blame us for not being kind to you." Zhang Yuochen was still very calm. He thought for a moment and said, "I have one line of a poem, please pass it to Master Lu. If Master Lu still doesn't want to see me after hearing this poem, I will leave immediately." Lu Fanshan advised again, "Brother, to tell you the truth, you will never meet Ancestor. It is not easy for us to meet him. Please go back." Since Zhang Yuochen had already been in Sword Sanctum, how could he leave so easily? Zhang Yuochen said again, "I sincerely come to visit Master Lu. I hope that you can at least tell him. Don't hesitate to make any requests if you have any." Lu Xuan was a bit speechless. She said, "We have made it clear to you. Not only you, it's also very hard for us to see Ancestor. How can we help to report it?" Zhang Yuochen frowned and felt that he indeed underestimated the difficulty of arranging this meeting. After all, Master Lu was the owner of Sword Sanctum. How would he meet a student in the Heaven Realm? There was a very large disparity between their identities. Seeing that Zhang Yuochen was still standing there, Lu Fanshan's eyes turned cold. After stretching his fingers, he slightly swung his palm and lifted up a grass without touching it. He pinched it between his two fingers. Genuine chi was infused into the grass. Suddenly, it turned into a sharp sword. Swish! The frantic sword breath spurted out, circling around Lu Fanshan. Lu Xuan stared at Zhang Yuochen. She said, "Why are you still standing there? My brother's strength is ranked in the top 10 among the younger generation of Eastern region. He was unbeatable and people call him Earth-shaking Bully. He is now angry. Once he draws his sword, you are a dead man." Lu Fanshan's mouth twitched. He severely stared at Lu Xuan, wanting to seal her mouth. Zhang Yuochen certainly could feel the powerful momentum coming from Lu Fanshan, but he was fearless and he stood firm. He slightly cupped his hands and said very politely, "I know that you have your own difficulties. However, I have to meet Master Lu today. This is the only choice I have." Zhang Yuochen had to find out what happened 800 years ago. This was an emotional entanglement. He had to meet Lu Yuanzai. After finishing his words, Zhang Yuochen took one step forward and crossed the boundary of Sword Stealer. Seeing that Zhang Yuochen had crossed the Sword Stealer, Lu Fanshan narrowed his eyes. A stroke of icing air came out of his body. He decisively struck out his sword. There was just a grasp between his two fingers. With the help of genuine chi, it became a sharp magic sword which could cut clean through iron as if it was mud. Swoosh! All sword breath gathered at the tip of the grass, turning into a dazzling light shuttle. Lu Fanshan's cultivation was very high, reaching the medium state of the heaven realm. His strength was much higher than Zihan Shaw's. Zhang Yuochen became serious and immediately gathered his genuine chi into his left middle finger, striking out a sword wave. Medium pulse breaking sword wave. Phew! His left middle finger burned with flames, from which a red sword chi flew out. Its explosive strength spread across like a flaming road. The flaming road, like a fire snake of sword breath, was as wide as a bowl mouth. Bam! The grass sword suddenly started to burn after being attacked by the sword wave and turned into ashes. The scorching hot sword breath spread over Lu Fanshan's arm. Lu Fanshan was surprised and immediately regulated the genuine chi into a silver bracelet on his wrist. Streaks of inscriptions appeared on the surface of the bracelet. Swoosh! A nail-sized armor popped out of the bracelet, stretching out toward his arm and fingertips. A short moment later, Lu Fanshan's arm was totally wrapped up by the silver armor, becoming an arm guard and blocked the sword wave. Bam! Although the silver arm guard withheld the attack of sword breath, Lu Fanshan was still shocked and the powerful impact pushed him backward. However, his cultivation was powerful. After releasing the celestial body she held, his body shape was immediately stabilized. He lightly landed on the ground as if nothing had happened. Brother, you are weaker than I thought. Didn't you just call yourself one of the top 10 masters of Eastern Region and Earth-shattering bully? Why can a common warrior defeat you? Lu Xiuan put her hands on her hip. She shook her head and sighed with disappointment. What do you know? Lu Fanshan glanced at Lu Xiuan. He said unpleasantly, what he used is sword ripple of 10 channels of Qi doctrine, which had reached the completion. It can be parallel to a martial technique in the inferior class of ghost level. I just used a grass, so I was slightly weaker. What? Martial technique in the inferior class of ghost level? Lu Xiuan stared at Zhang Yuochen, showing a curious expression. Her eyes were lightened up, like she was looking at a rare animal. Even some masters in the fish-dragon realm could not successfully practice a ghost-level martial technique. But a warrior in the heaven realm actually did it. How could they not be surprised? Seeing Zhang Yuochen's strength, Lu Fanshan no longer despised him. He said solemnly, are you a student of the school of the martial market, or are you a disciple of Qi doctrine? With Zhang Yuochen's strength, he was absolutely a top talent among the younger generation of Eastern Region. Such a god's favored son must have very high status no matter he was in the school of the martial market or in Qi doctrine. He was by no means not a common person. Zhang Yuochen said, I will say this again. I want to meet Master Lu. Lu Xiuan's impression of Zhang Yuochen had changed a bit. She said, hey, what do you want? Why do you have to meet Ancestor? Being able to defeat her brother who was very excellent, he was not an ordinary person. So, Lu Xiuan took the initiative to ask Zhang Yuochen, giving him a chance to speak. Only warriors with strong strength could be respected. Zhang Yuochen certainly would not expose his true identity. And even if he did, they would possibly not understand the relationship between the Sword Sanctum and the Zhangs. So, Zhang Yuochen drew out the Abyss Ancient Sword and put it flat on his hands. He said, I have a broken sword, hoping that Master Lu can help me repair it. Ah, I thought it was something important. It turns out to repair a sword. Lu Xiuan clapped her hands and commended, saying, our Lu family has been refining weapons for generations. The Sword Sanctum is a sanctum of refining weapon. I'm not boasting ourselves, but every one of us is a master of refining weapon. Repairing sword is a small matter. I can help you. Lu Xiuan stretched out one of her white hand and took over the broken sword from Zhang Yuochen's hand. With the fame of Sword Sanctum, she certainly would not snatch his sword. So Zhang Yuochen was not worried at all. He handed over the Abyss Ancient Sword to her. As the old saying went, the expert will prove the truths or reveal lies. Lu Xiuan deserved to be the inheritor of Sword Sanctum. As she took over the Abyss Ancient Sword, She stopped smiling and her face changed. How can this be possible? She instantly held it with both her hands and observed it carefully. The more she looked, the more shocked she was. There was an unbelievable expression in her eyes. "Miss, can you repair this sword?" Zhang Yuochen asked. Lu Fanxian was very confident in his sister's skill of refining weapon. Although she was only 16 years old, she was the top one genius in spiritual power of a millennium in Sword Sanctum. Her spiritual power had reached level 38, and she became a 5th grade weapon refiner. A 5th grade weapon refiner of 16 years old would definitely make those weapon refiners of Oman Ridge feel ashamed. Lu Fanxian cast a glance at Lu Xiuan. Seeing that she was still observing the broken sword, he suddenly felt confused and asked, "Can you fix it or not? It is just a broken sword. Why are you just staring at it? What do you know?" Lu Xiuan raised her head and stared at Lu Fanxian. Exposing two of her tiger teeth, she said, "This broken sword was made of natural divine iron. Do you know anything about natural divine iron? According to the record in Canon of Ritual Items, in the entire Kunlun's field, only Empress Kaiyao got one piece of it 800 years ago, and it was cast into the blood drop sword which was so invincible that could sweep the world." Hearing this, not only Lu Fanxian was surprised, even Zhang Yuochen was shocked.